Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who is in the studio with the latest this afternoon. Tom, a lot to get through. Let's start, first of all, with a major announcement in the last hour or so when it comes to the vaccines for younger kids.
That's right. For the first time, 5 to 11-year-olds in the United Kingdom have been approved to be able to have the vaccine. Now, there are some caveats to this. The MHRA has approved the vaccine. The JCVI, however, has said that it's only the most vulnerable 5 to 11-year-olds who should be getting it at this stage. So that's those who are clinically vulnerable, at clinical risk, but also those 5 to 11-year-olds who live with immunosuppressed people. They will also be offered the vaccine. There's a slight difference in the vaccine as well. Instead of the ordinary 30 microgram dose that everyone aged 12 and above is able to get, this will be a 10 microgram dose of the vaccine, so 1/3 as strong as older children. That's the current state of play. However, it is likely that this may well be expanded beyond just the vulnerable 5 to 11-year-olds. Of course, we've seen that in other countries. It seems to be the case that in this country we are rather lagging behind many countries on the continent, and indeed America, Canada, other OECD countries that have approved this earlier.
And talking about the wider vaccine programme, 968,665 boosters delivered yesterday. That beats the blockbuster that we saw on Saturday. We're almost getting to 1 million a day. And this is important, isn't it, when it comes to restrictions, because the evidence suggests not only are you less likely to end up in hospital or indeed have severe illness if you've been boosted, but also that you are far less likely to even catch the virus.
That's right, and less likely to pass it on. Now, we do know that of course you can catch it and you can pass it on if you're vaccinated, but you're less likely to. And it's that reduction in likelihood that makes a real difference and that can really slow the spread of this virus. We know the one big risk that politicians are worried about is if everyone gets the virus at the same time. And if everyone gets the virus at the same time, that could pose a risk to the NHS, which has a limited number of beds. However, if we can spread out the amount of time at which people get this virus, if you're less likely to pass it on, if people get this virus over several months rather than over several weeks, that puts us in a much better stead. That means we may not need those non-pharmaceutical intervention, those restrictions on our lives in order to stop the NHS from being overwhelmed.
And just very finally, this all feeds in, of course, until potentially Parliament meeting next week. We don't know that for certain. The Prime Minister saying it is finely balanced. But it seems like that balance may have tipped slightly in recent days away from restrictions to a degree. Studies, and a new one has just come out this afternoon from South Africa, in which they essentially are saying it is less severe. We've got the booster programme on boosters, if you like. In addition to that, the cases don't seem to be, and we'll get the figures, of course, for yesterday later on in the next couple of hours, don't seem to be quite as increasing as much as we had thought, i.e. people are regulating their activity.
Yes.
Is it possible that actually Parliament might not meet next week, that England might stick on the course it currently is in?
That is certainly a possibility. I think the most important note of all of those points is that in London specifically, it seems like there's been a bit of a plateau in those cases. Now, clearly, a lot of that will have been the way that people have been regulating their own behaviour, these sort of voluntary lockdowns that people have been doing. Now, that's been awful for the hospitality sector in London. The number of cancelled bookings, the restaurants, the bars, the pubs, the theatres, all of these industries are suffering. But the virus isn't growing as quickly as it may well have done, all other things being equal. So that is a relatively good point, but also we're fortunate in that even though there are these 40-odd mutations within Omicron, 3 doses of the same vaccine do work against it. 2 not so good, but 3 do work against it. We haven't had to design an entirely new vaccine for this. There are some silver linings to this, and of course that data out of South Africa, potentially up to 70% less harmful, less severe for individuals. So maybe, just maybe, there is some light at the end of this tunnel without those restrictions. However, we did not know Omicron existed even a month ago. Indeed. We don't have a lot of data. That's the problem.
Indeed, and that's why the government's insisting we need to wait for it, though, of course, critics would accuse that might be too late, but we will find out. Tom, thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood